So our next step, right? So what we have here is a relatively, flat concept, right? I'm typing in exactly what I want for every single one of the indices in that list. And that's not really smart, right? Because I have to sit here right now. I've got 50 something different things. I don't want to sit there and type in 50 something values. Or if I have a 500,000 points, I'm not going to sit there and type in a 500,000 different radius values, right? That would suck. So what I'm going to do is take a list like this, right? So I'm going to turn this list that is basically one revolution of a pattern, and I'm going to repeat it. And I'm going to repeat it by whatever number or whatever count of numbers there are that exist that I need it for. Okay? So it's actually a very simple concept. It sounded way worse when I just said it. But so what we have to do is it's called repeat data. So I mentioned we're going to be working under the set tab quite a bit today. And so I'm going to look at the sequence panel for the first time. And this is where you can kind of generate and restructure a lot of the information that you've created as a complete set or list. Okay, so that's kind of an important differentiation. The list feature here will modify your list. The sequence will allow you to restructure it in some way. It's kind of a different kind of modification. I might have just confused you with that. So if it confused you, just forget about it and let's just explore it. So anyway, under sequence, we're going to use repeat data. And let's put it down here because the data that we're going to repeat is this one. So it's probably going to plug in something like over here. So anyway, repeat data. It says it repeats a pattern until it reaches a certain length. So then what does it need in order to do that? So we go to the left side of the component and we explore what it's actually asking for. So it's asking for the data as a list. And so notice how it says it's an empty generic data parameter. That's important. A generic data parameter can be anything. Pretty much anything. Not anything. But it can be a mesh, it can be a surface, it can be a box, it can be a brep, which we'll talk about brep soon. It can be numbers, it can be text. Whatever it is, if it's a data-based element, it can be passed through as a list in this function. And then we also have the length of the final pattern. Okay, so it says an empty integer parameter. So I do want to take another quick sidebar on this video to show you a little bit of a trick to help you figure things out a little faster. If you look at this tooltip, right, the length feature for this input, it has an icon to the left. That icon, most icons are very descriptive just visually. This one is basically it's a param, right? So anytime you see the black hexagon, you know that it comes from the params panel. So if you're looking at the params panel, and you'll get used to this in time, but you see under primitive that there's an integer param there. Okay, so if you're used to using icons, then this is kind of a way for you to make those connections. If you're not used to using icons, and I'll show you how to change the thing, then that might not necessarily be a connection that you want. Visually. So just be aware that when you hover over this, you'll be able to see the icon as a way of understanding what it's asking for, what type of data it needs. But then you also should be reading the description, empty integer parameter. So that tells you it specifically needs to be an integer. So still on the subject of the sidebar, you should be aware that the icons and the names, you can kind of change the way that you want it to be displayed. What you can do is under display, you can change it to draw icons. And all of these tools will show the icon rather than the command name or the component name. That's important to know because when you go online, and you try to search for help and stuff like that, in my experience, most people use icons, which kind of makes me mad because when I look at that icon, I might not have any clue what that little red arrow in a little box does or means. So I don't know what to search for unless somebody tells me. So I generally leave it on the default of names like this. But I want you to also be aware, I'm giving you a lot of information with this sidebar, but I want you to also be aware that you can change the display on a particular component as well. So if I don't feel like seeing this giant name repeat, it's just too big or it's just, you know, annoying or something like that, I can right click it in the center there. Right click it and then go to next to the name of it, which you can change, by the way. You can change that to read whatever you want. But if you just want it to be an icon instead, you can click this right here, and it'll change it to either text. If it's an integer, you can change it to text-based or the icon itself. So this repeat, I can switch to the icon. Just right-click and then go to this little button on the right-hand side. Okay. Now let's get off the sidebar. Let me drop a new one in. That was under set, sequence, repeat data. So I mentioned it needs the data as a list, and it needs the length of that list. So the data is what? What are we trying to repeat here?
The data that's in the panel?
Right, the data that's in the panel, because I want to have this pattern perpetuate through my flattened list the entire way. So I'm going to plug that in, and then we have to measure the length of the final pattern. So we can use old information in order to generate that numerical value. So if you hover over the points list output, I know we've been focusing mostly on what happens like with the body of the type of information that's in there, but you should be aware that it also gives you a count of how many items exist in that list. So if we can find a tool that will measure the length of that list, we should be able to just plug that in, you know, measure it and then plug it in, and that should always match exactly the list length, even if I change the number of values that I have in the pattern. Okay, so that's going to look like this, really. If you go to set and list, now we're going back into the list side, you can do this tool right here that's called list length. It very easily just measures the length of a list. And so it only has one input, one output. It'll take the list as a list, as the input, right? And then it just pops out the number on the other end of how many there are, number of items in the list. So I can plug points in. It gives me the value of 54 as an integer. And then I plug that into the L. And so now if I drop a panel on the other side and stretch it down, you'll see that that pattern is now repeated 54 to an index of 54 values. Cool stuff, huh? So I want to wrap this up here in just a moment, a very, very quick moment. So the connection here is really you take the data and you plug it in to override the radius connection. And so now your pattern looks a lot like what you saw before, right? It's exactly what you saw before. Why is it exactly what you saw before? What's that? Well, yeah, but more importantly, I generated exactly as many numbers as I have in every count of rows. So if I change, and guys, this is when you're going to want to watch probably. if I change the count, then that changes, oh, not that one, sorry. That'll change the pattern. Let me make it a little more compact here. So as I'm changing the count, you see the pattern becomes, vastly differentiated because the number of points that it's reading across here changes. Any questions? No questions. All right.
So when you change the extent of y or x, it just the pattern remains like continuous, but it just like stretches it.
Kind of. So what you see here, right? If you think, let me turn the display on. Notice how now we're reading 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 being, the 10th number rather than the 11th or 12th number. So the pattern then goes back to your 1.25 down here. And then it goes back to, see how 0 and 12 are the same? So it keeps going throughout. And so that's why you're getting this new, dynamism, so to speak.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How come when you change the y, it changes the pattern, but when you change the x, it does not?
Very good question. The reason it doesn't change in the x direction is because the order of where it's reading the count.
Begins with origin.
What's that?
Because it begins with origin.
Yeah, because it has a direction. And in the next video, I'll go through that. So let's go ahead and take a quick break, and I'm going to show you how you can flip the direction of this to get it to read the other way.